Everybody, this is Dream, and this is going to be a video for the Sunday slate that actually starts at 12 p.m. Eastern because the Colorado and Cincinnati game was rained out yesterday. And I do believe that they have the same pitchers as today as they did yesterday, which is Lodolo and Marquez. So just keep that in mind because the slate starts a little bit earlier than what normal Sunday main slates do. But we have a pretty broad list of games. We have 10 games to take a look at here. So pitching is kind of wonky, and there's a lot of teams that are in really good situations. So first of all, I'm going to go ahead and tell you the stacks, and this is kind of in order. New York Mets, Texas, Boston, and Kansas City. And then also the Cincinnati-Colorado game and the Oakland-Baltimore game. Both those games should be decently scoring just because of the lack of quality pitching. It's going to be hard to figure out which teams you want to stack simply because there's so many bad pitchers today. Eric Fetty for Washington pitching against the Mets. Now the Mets have not hit the ball particularly well the last couple games, and if you look at a lot of their batters, their last 10 have been really subpar, and they didn't even win yesterday against Patrick Corbin. So I'm a little hesitant on the Mets, but overall they still look like a really good option. There's a few players from the Mets we definitely want to target at the very least. Obviously, Texas and Boston game, both guys that are pitching in that game are in bad shape. Texas is a lot safer than Boston. And then for the Oakland-Baltimore game, both guys are really below average, and I think Baltimore is a little bit safer simply because they're just a better hitting team, but Spencer Watkins is pitching for Baltimore, and he's been completely awful this season. So there's just a lot of really subpar pitching, and it was actually difficult to find some really high-end pitching that I thought was going to be useful. So, but at any rate, I'll get into those guys now. So my overall top pitcher is Max Fried. Now, the problem with Max is that he hasn't been good against Miami in the last 2 years. He's played 6 games, and he's really not had a really good game except for the last one this season against Miami where he had 20 fantasy points. But he's kind of been up and down a little bit lately. He's had some really big games against the Mets and Pittsburgh and Arizona, and then he's been kind of average in others. You almost have to throw him in here because he can get strikeouts, and most of these other guys that are available for today are not big strikeout guys, so you need pitchers that can get strikeouts, primarily, and if there's only one on the board, then he's almost a must-play. He is in a little bit of a tight situation just because he hasn't been great against Miami, but I still think he's probably pretty safe because he has some strikeout upside. The next guy I'm going to talk about is George Kirby for Seattle. Now, he's not super ideal because of the right-handed hitters on Cleveland, but he has been decent as of late, and he seems like he's a little bit overpriced, but he's overall probably one of the better pitchers on the slate today. However, he's not a huge strikeout game every game, and Cleveland is pretty good sometimes at avoiding that, but I think he's a pretty decent play. He's just slightly overpriced. Then the next guy that I like is Carlos Carrasco, who will be returning to start for the first time against Washington, and obviously that's a nice team to get back into the game with. He's played Washington 3 times this year, and all 3 times he's 19.5, 19.8, and 20.8. He's not going to get a ton of strikeouts. He got on 15 strikeouts in those 3 games, but he's still a pretty solid pitcher, and they're going to need him to do something pretty good. So hopefully he can get going in this particular game. I mean, if you're going to have to come back from an injury and get in against a bad team, then Washington's a prime team to choose to get back at. Then the next 2 guys, the final 2 guys, are Lucas Garlido for Chicago White Sox against Minnesota. Obviously, Minnesota has not been doing very well against Chicago so far. And then Minnesota, first time he went against them, he had 20 fantasy points and 9 strikeouts, which helps if you don't get too deep in the game, which he only had 4 innings in that game. So, I think he's in a pretty good spot against Minnesota simply because the Chicago White Sox are doing well against Minnesota this season. But I think he's not ideal, but he's a little bit cheaper, and he does have some strikeout upside, which is obviously not a bad thing, but he's only averaging about 5 per game the last 10. So it's, it's not the most ideal situation, but it's, better than most of the others. And then finally, Frankie Montas for the Yankees. Now, this is going to be a hard decision to make because he's averaging 25 fantasy points a game against Tampa Bay. However, he did those when he was with Oakland. And since he's been with the Yankees, he has not had a good game. Like, really. His highest scoring game is 12 fantasy points against the Angels, which, or I guess 16 against the Mets. But it's just not, he hasn't really had an upside game. It's been since he was with Oakland that he had a really plus game. So, obviously, he's a little bit pricier than he has been, but he's a lot lower than he was early in the season. And so I think he's probably a pretty decent option just because he's been really good against Tampa Bay, and maybe he can finally get a good game for the Yankees. But it's still a little bit of a risky play because he's just, he's not a big strikeout guy necessarily, and in those two games he averaged 6 strikeouts a game. So that's he's a little bit risky, but I think that pretty much everybody on the slate is kind of risky, so he's probably one of the better options simply because of his history against Tampa Bay. However, if I had to, my top pick is Max Fried. There's nobody that comes close simply because he's going to get strikeouts, and he can, he needs 20.5 points to be worthwhile here, and I think he can get that. So for catchers, so we have a few good catchers to choose from. There's nothing super ideal here, unfortunately, but that's actually going to be true for a couple of different positions. So obviously your top tier option is going to be Sean Murphy for Oakland. He's got home run threat written all over him, and I feel like he's been really good against Baltimore this season, and Watkins is not a good pitcher, and so he's really just due to have another really good game against them. Then if you want a Hail Mary option, you can always go for his teammate, Shea Lingerlays. He's obviously a strikeout king, but also a potential for a home run king. He's had 2 home runs the last 10 games. You just have to bear with the fact that he's a very Hail Mary type of choice because of that. He's either going to get 20-something points or he's going to get 2 or 4. And so you just have to deal with that. Then for some secondary options at this position, MJ Melendez is one pick that I like for Kansas City. He hasn't actually hit a home run recently, but I think he's kind of due. Or actually, I think he actually hit one yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. This isn't actually caught up. But at any rate, he's kind of a secondary option just because of his price. But then another guy that I like is Adley Rutschman for Baltimore. However, he hasn't been that great recently, but I think, again, he had another home run yesterday. So, he's maybe getting back on track. But if you really want to save a little money and you don't want to pay for Sean Murphy too, you can choose to choose Travis d'Arnaud if he starts for Atlanta. He's been kind of hit and miss lately, but his hits have been really big, and he's playing really well. So 8.4 last 10, including it's not 8.4, it's 11 fantasy points for the last 10 games with 4 home runs. And then, if he doesn't start and they start Contreras, then he's also a viable option. He hadn't hit as many home runs, but he's actually hitting the ball pretty well as well. So that's what I have at catcher. There's really not a whole lot of value there outside of Lingerlays as a Hail Mary type option. But overall, I think with other positions having so many value options, we can probably pay up at that position. At first base, we have 3 top options. The first one is Nathaniel Lowe, for Texas. He's just got a plus matchup written all over him, and he's one of the hottest players in baseball that's not named Austin Riley. He's averaging 14.9 per game with 5 home runs in the last 10 games. He's been utterly ridiculous. And I believe he actually hit one today as well. So, it's showing here now. So, I definitely think he's a quality option. Should be the top option on the slate. He's probably going to be my home run call of the day just because of his matchup and stuff like that, and just the fact he's due for another home run. So let's go Nathaniel Lowe. Then I also have Ryan Mountcastle as another good option. He also hit a home run today, if I do remember correctly. It's not showing up on here yet. But he's been batting really well as of late. 6.6 last 10 with 2 home runs. It's a little bit lower than what we like, but overall, I think he's a home run threat just because of the matchup. And then Ty France is my last option as a top tier pick because he's hit 3 home runs last 10 with a 7.6, and he's been playing really well as well. Then I have two like Hail Mary type, well, kind of secondary options, I guess. One of them is Nick Pratto for Kansas City. Now he's been hitting the ball a heck of a lot better than he started the season, and it started when he started playing because he's only got 40 games in. But he's had 3 home runs the last 10 games. Now he's been kind of boomer bust, so that's why he's kind of like a Hail Mary option. And then the second guy is Christian Arroyo for Boston. Boston has a nice situation, and he's been averaging 7.6 a game. Now he's not really a home run threat, but he's just having games where he's 7, 10, 12, 14 type scoring. So he's a pretty solid option as an alternative. He can also play second base as well. So he's somebody to consider at both positions. Now they're both Hail Mary options, like I said, but I think that you probably don't need to drop down to those prices for them specifically, but you can utilize Christian Arroyo at another position. So, and then at second base, I have 3 top tier options. Marcus Semien for Texas. Obviously, Texas is in a really good spot. 11.7 with 2 home runs the last 10. Then also Jonathan India for Cincinnati. I had him pegged for last night too when they were playing, but it got rained out, and so I thought he was going to be a pretty good option as well. He's been hitting the ball really well lately. 421 for the last 10 games is super, and I look for him to continue. Now his price is pretty expensive, so do be aware of that. And then the final one is Jeff McNeil. Now he hasn't been hitting the ball super great, but he's kind of against Fetty, and I like when people go against Fetty. He actually did good. He was one of the only guys that did good against Corbin yesterday, so I like Fetty to be an option. So, no, that's incorrect. I don't know I'm not sure what he did against Corbin. Sorry, I was misreading the information on the card there. Anyway, that's what I have for the top tier guys. And then for secondary options, obviously Arroyo. Another guy is Tony Kemp, who he can play outfield if you would like. He just seems like he's been pretty safe lately, getting 7 and 10-point games a lot, and so he's not really a home run threat, but he's been hitting the ball pretty well, and he does like to hit against Baltimore as well. He's kind of almost a Hail Mary option. And then who I might use at second base today as a cheap option is Gunnar Henderson. Now it didn't show up on here, but I think he had 5 points today, and so even if he gets 5 points, you want him to get 6 really. But his price has come up slightly, but he's just been hitting the ball pretty well, and he's also a home run threat, and he was good in the minors and stuff all season, so I really like him as an option, especially early on while pitchers are still trying to figure him out, and it's not like Oakland's got any good pitchers that are going to be able to figure him out, so he's in a good spot. And so I think he's kind of like a secondary / Hail Mary option, but for his price point and with there not being a whole lot of value at the position, he's somebody you have to consider. Then at third base, I've got really 2 top tier options. One of them is Bobby Witt. Now he can play third base or shortstop. He's averaging 10 fantasy points a game the last 10, and he's also had 3 home runs. And so he's been playing pretty well for Kansas City. And I definitely like a lot of the Kansas City players today. And then the other top tier option is Austin Riley. Now he doesn't have the best pitching matchup, but this dude has hit 4 home runs in 4 days. And, maybe he can continue that streak. He's been hitting the ball good anyway, despite the fact that he just started having 4 home runs in 4 days. So I look for him to continue to hit the ball well. And even against good pitching, he's been doing really well. So he also just seems to be even better and better at Atlanta, which is where they're playing. So then I have 2 secondary options. One of them is Duran for Texas. He's not super ideal, but he's hit 2 home runs the last 10. And he's averaging 6 fantasy points a game. And he's cheap enough where that's actually can pay off for you. And then Jameer Jimir Candelario for Detroit. I was really hesitant to mention him, except for the fact that he's got an 8.8 and he's almost batting 300 for the last 10 games with 2 home runs. He's been pretty solid as of late, so I think he's somebody that's like almost a Hail Mary option. If you really got to save money, then he's somebody you could consider. And then I have another Hail Mary option, which is Spencer Steer. Now, he's only played one game so far in his Major League career. He had 25 points with a home run. And if you look at his AAA season, he had 23 home runs there. And he also got walked really well. So he seems like he's going to come in with a bang. And they're playing in Cincinnati against bad Colorado pitching. I mean, I like that situation. So he's somebody to consider just because of his inexpensive. Excuse me. Okay, so for shortstop, I only have really 4 options here, and none of them are very cheap. The first one is Corey Seager for Texas. You might have noticed that Texas is being brought up a lot here. Yeah, I mean, he's got 3 home runs the last 10 games with 10.5 per game. He's just hitting the ball really well. Bobby Witt again, who I mentioned already, and then Xander Bogaerts for I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but anyway, for Boston, he's averaging almost 14 fantasy points a game and only 2 home runs. He's got 19 hits in the last 10 games, including 5 doubles. And he's only struck out 5 times. That's incredible. He's almost, I mean, my goodness, look at these numbers. He's somebody I really want to try to fit in my lineup if I can get him in there. And then my secondary tier is Dansby Swanson for Atlanta. He's been hitting the ball pretty well. Obviously not as good as those 3 other guys, but he's somebody you could, use as an alternate option in a decent matchup. And he's been really good against Miami this season. So that's what I have at shortstop. Unfortunately, not any real value guys. I looked up and down and tried to find somebody that was under the 4,000 or 4,500 range, and I really couldn't come up with much. If they're just Tommy Edman was kind of interesting, but he's kind of got a tough matchup based on his positioning and stuff like that, and even the guys against Fetty have just been so poor as of late, and they didn't do good against the guy and Corbin. It's hard to make any consideration for those guys. I mean, there's guys you could say as a Hail Mary, the Mets, but like Escobar, but it's just super risky. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get outfielders. So I actually have quite a few guys that are all kind of in the top tier secondary situation, and I have one Hail Mary. I'm going to tell you the Hail Mary option first. This is Bubba Thompson. He's only got 26 games under his belt. And he's not a home run hitter, but he's averaging 9.2 points per game, and he's batting 400 over the last 10. And as you can see, his statistics look really good, and he's in a nice little plus matchup against Boston, which he has crushed with 12.3 fantasy points a game. And 10 at bats, he's got 6 hits in 3 games. I definitely think he's a solid Hail Mary option at minimum price, in fact. So he could help you fit in some other guys if you really need it. And so let me go ahead and get into all my other options. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 options for you. So TJ Friedl, I guess, is going to start off the stats here for Cincinnati, 9.1 in the last 10 with 2 home runs. He's also at home, which is a nice little benefit for him, even though he hasn't really taken advantage of it so much this season. His batting average is so much better at home than away, and he looks like he's going to continue his good hitting that he's started lately. Another guy, and this is squarely a secondary option, is Gavin Sheets. He's hit 3 home runs in the last 10. He's averaging 10 fantasy points a game with almost 400 batting average. He's been getting a couple hits every game. It's been really good for him lately. And, 387 batting average, I'm sorry. But yeah, he's been pretty good. He's squarely a secondary option. Riley Green is my next guy that I really like. He's actually been batting .425. Some of these guys have gotten hot. Not only that, but he's got 2 triples and 2 home runs and 17 hits in the last 10 games, averaging 12 fantasy points a game for his team. I think he's on a pretty good little streak as well of hits. Yeah, I don't think he's missed a hit since 8/19, which is 2 weeks ago about. So he's been really hitting the ball well, and I think he has a good chance to consider. He's probably one of my favorite outfielder position players today. Uh, Alex Verdugo for Boston's another guy I really like. He's averaging 9.2 per game last 10. He's a little bit more of a hit or miss kind of guy, but he's still got a lot of potential, and he's been hitting the ball really well. And he's in a plus matchup. One of my other favorite players is Adolis Garcia for Texas. He's just in a huge plus matchup. Obviously, he's kind of just a home run hitter, but he's gonna have a pretty good look at Boston's terrible pitcher. So I definitely like him as an option. Obviously, he's more expensive. Then I like Mark Canha against Fetty. This is like the match made in heaven right here because he's had 3 home runs in the last 10, averaging 10 fantasy points a game, hitting 324. You know, he can knock a home run against this guy, so I look for him to be a good option. He's one of the few guys on the Mets that doesn't seem like he's in a big slump. Against Washington, he's 10 fantasy points a game with 444 average, including a home run. I think he's due to continue to make that average look about like that. So he seems like a really solid option. He's also only $3,700. Then I have Cedric Mullins, who's in a pretty safe position against the average Oakland pitcher, and he's been hitting the ball pretty well. He actually hit a home run yesterday as well, so he's got 2 home runs the last 10. He seems like a really solid option, obviously one of the expensive ones. Then Ian Happ for the Cubs. He's not in super ideal situation, but he's 8.7 in the last 10, including 2 home runs. And then Brandon Nimmo, again for the Mets against Fetty. He hasn't been hitting quite as good as Canha, but he's also usually the leadoff, and I like him in this matchup if he can get, I think he's got the potential to get back on track. And, he hasn't been bad lately. Like, you see all these 8s, 9s, 7s, 16, etc. Like, he's been doing pretty good, batting 316. So it's just a matter of time before he starts hits a home run or something. And Fetty's a good option. He's been really good against Washington as well, 8.3 fantasy points a game. So then I have 2 more guys. Michael Harris. It's hard to not use this guy every day. He is just absolutely 441 over the last 10 games, 15 hits, 3 home runs. He doesn't strike out all that much either, once a game approximately. He is just absolutely crushing the ball. I mean, he's just playing great. And so, he's been pretty much winning half of Atlanta's games the last, 10 or so games that they've won. He's been one of the one of the RBIs or home runs or whatever that would win the game for them. So, he's been really solid lately. Really like him, and he's still pretty inexpensive for his production. And then last but not least is Sterling Marte for the Mets. Now he's not been quite as good as the other guys on the Mets outfield, but he's still been pretty good. 2 home runs, 8.7, stuff like that. Obviously his price is super expensive, which is pretty much the only hold off for him, and just the fact that the Mets are kind of wailing and didn't do very good the last 2 games for against Washington. But he's still a better option than most of the Mets. So those are the guys that I like. I think that you have a lot of good options to set up a really good lineup. Pitching is going to be a little bit more difficult and tricky just because there's no super value guys, and everybody's got, there's nobody that just looks blow away. It's like he's going to blow you away with, a 35-point game. But I think Max Fried is, probably the closest one. I appreciate all you guys for liking, commenting, and subscribing. If you have any questions or comments or any players you think that I left out that you think would be good, feel free to leave that down below. And have a nice day, guys.